Here's a weird flex for you. Your nose can outperform a great white shark. Not at hunting, not at swimming, at smelling. Specifically, at smelling rain. And once you know why, you will never sniff the air after a storm the same way again. Picture this. It's been a dry, dusty week. The sidewalk is practically begging for water. Then the first drops hit, and suddenly there's this smell. Earthy, clean, a little electric, somehow both ancient and refreshing at the same time. You know exactly what it is, even if you've never once tried to describe it. Two Australian researchers gave it a name back in 1964. Working in dry regions of India and studying exactly this reaction between rainfall and baked, cracked earth. They called it petrichor, mashed together from Greek words for stone and the mythical fluid that was supposed to run through the veins of the gods, which is a genuinely dramatic name for something that happens every time your neighbor's sprinkler kicks on. But here's the part almost nobody knows. Rain itself doesn't smell like anything. Pure water is basically odorless. Distilled water, tap water, the water falling out of that cloud, none of it carries a scent of its own. So if the rain isn't what you're smelling, what is? This is where we bust the first big misconception. Most people assume petrichor is just the smell of wet dirt, like moisture itself has a scent. It doesn't. What's actually happening is that the raindrop is a delivery system. It's triggering, releasing, and physically launching a cocktail of other things into the air. And those things were sitting there, silently, the entire dry spell, just waiting for water to set them free. The first ingredient is plant-based. During a dry period, certain plants secrete a thin, oily residue that seeps into soil and rock. Chemists call these compounds yellow oils, and one of their jobs seems to be slowing down seed germination during droughts, basically telling seeds, not yet, it's too dry, wait. That oil doesn't evaporate on its own. It sits there, chemically inert, until a raindrop physically breaks it loose and sends it airborne. So step one of the smell of rain is quite literally the smell of a plant's drought survival strategy getting interrupted. The second ingredient is where things get delightfully strange. Bacteria. Specifically a group called actinomycetes. Soil bacteria that, when they sporulate or die off, release a compound called geosmin. Say that one twice, it's a good word. Geosmin is a bicyclic alcohol, which is just a fancy way of describing its molecular shape, and it is the single most efficient earthy smell molecule in nature. It's the same compound responsible for the taste some people get from beets, the reason certain wines pick up an earthy note nobody asked for, and, less charmingly, the reason your tap water sometimes tastes faintly like a basement after a heavy rain season. Water treatment plants monitor for it specifically because customers complain the instant it shows up, even at concentrations so low they'd be functionally invisible to almost any other measuring method. These same actinomycete bacteria, by the way, are minor celebrities in medicine. They're the group responsible for producing a huge share of the world's naturally derived antibiotics. So the organism quietly perfuming your street corner during a rainstorm is, in another context, working in a lab somewhere helping fight infections. Overachievers, honestly. And here's your surprising fact for the video, the one worth pausing on. The human nose can detect geosmin at around 5 parts per trillion. Trillion, with a T. To put that number somewhere, your brain can actually hold on to it. That's roughly equivalent to detecting a single drop of something diluted into enough water to fill hundreds of Olympic swimming pools, and your nose just casually clocks it walking past a puddle. To put that in perspective against a real competitor, a shark. Famous, celebrated, practically mythologized in every ocean documentary ever made for its incredible sense of smell, can detect a drop of blood in water at around 1 part per million. Million, not trillion. Do the actual math, and humans come out roughly 200,000 times more sensitive to the smell of rain than a shark is to blood in the water. A shark spends its entire life being the ocean's smell-based apex predator, gets a whole Discovery Channel week dedicated to how scary its nose is, and it still can't touch what your nose does passively, for free, while you're standing in a parking lot doing absolutely nothing impressive, possibly holding a coffee, possibly not even paying attention. Why would humans evolve a superpower this specific? The leading idea is that early humans who could detect geosmin from a distance had a serious survival edge. Smelling rain or damp fertile ground before you could see it meant you could find water sources, migrate toward fertile land, and avoid dying of thirst a little more efficiently than the guy next to you who couldn't smell anything. It's a nice story. It makes sense. But here's an honest, we don't fully know yet moment for you. Researchers and anthropologists are still debating exactly how strong that survival pressure really was, and whether this extreme sensitivity evolved specifically for water detection or just came along for the ride as a side effect of something else going on in our evolutionary history. Nobody's faking certainty on this one. The compound is real, the sensitivity is real, the why is still genuinely up for discussion. Now, ingredient 3. And this is the one that explains that specific electric smell you get right before a storm even touches down, before a single drop hits the ground. That's ozone. High up in a storm system, electrical activity from developing lightning can split oxygen molecules apart, and those fragments recombine into ozone, O3. Downdrafts and gusty outflow winds from the approaching storm carry that ozone down to nose level, which is why some people swear they can smell rain coming minutes before it actually arrives. That's not a superstition. That's atmospheric chemistry arriving fashionably early. And here's a small correction worth making while we're here. People often describe that smell as the smell of electricity itself, like electricity has some inherent odor humming through it. It doesn't. Electricity isn't a substance you can smell. What you're actually detecting is a specific, real molecule, ozone, that electrical activity happens to produce as a byproduct. The sensation feels electric. The chemistry is just gas.n, so you've got plant oils, bacterial geosmin, and ozone. 3 separate sources, 3 separate smells, blending into the one unified experience your brain files under petrichor. But knowing the ingredients doesn't explain how they actually get airborne. Compounds trapped in soil don't just float upward on their own. Something has to launch them. And this next part is genuinely one of my favorite pieces of applied physics.n9 2015. Engineers set up ultra-high-speed cameras, recording thousands of frames per second, far faster than the human eye could ever process, to film exactly what happens in the fraction of a second a raindrop hits a porous surface like soil or stone. And it is not what you'd picture. Slow it down enough and a raindrop hitting dirt does not behave like a water balloon smacking pavement. On contact, it traps a tiny pocket of air right at the point of impact, squeezed between the falling droplet and the ground beneath it. That trapped air forms a bubble inside the droplet itself, and the bubble does exactly what bubbles do everywhere else in nature. It rises. It shoots upward through the body of the raindrop and bursts open right at the top, launching a fine spray of microscopic aerosol droplets straight up into the air. The exact same physics behind a bubble rising through a glass of champagne and popping at the surface. Except instead of carbonation fizzing into your nose, these tiny aerosol jets are now carrying geosmin, those plant oils, and even living soil bacteria straight up off the ground and into the air column above it, where wind picks them up and spreads them for meters in every direction, sometimes much further depending on conditions. And each single raindrop can generate hundreds of these aerosol droplets. Within microseconds, hundreds per drop. Multiply that across an entire rainstorm hitting an entire field or forest floor, and what you're standing in is less, it's raining, and more, the ground just launched an invisible chemical fireworks show directly into your face. Except pleasant, and free, and something you'll never see coming. And here's the counterintuitive twist that deserves to be its own fun fact. Light, gentle rain produces more of this aerosol effect than a heavy downpour does. That seems completely backwards, right? More rain falling should mean more smell released. But heavy rain hits the ground too hard and too fast. The droplets slam down with so much force that the delicate bubble-forming, bubble-bursting sequence gets blown apart before it can properly happen. Light rain, falling gently, gives each individual drop exactly the right amount of time and exactly the right impact speed to trap air cleanly and launch that aerosol spray in one clean burst. Which means the next time it's just barely drizzling outside. Not even enough to bother with an umbrella. That is, scientifically, the single best weather condition for generating petrichor. A gentle sprinkle is nature running its own smell of rain experiment at peak efficiency, while a torrential downpour is, chemically speaking, trying too hard. Here's a fun side effect of all this chemistry. Petrichor is notoriously difficult to bottle. Perfume companies have tried for decades to capture the smell of rain in a spray bottle, and it never quite works. Geosmin is highly volatile and chemically unstable outside its natural context, meaning it breaks down almost as fast as you can isolate it in a lab. Perfumers get around this by faking it with synthetic stand-ins and earthy notes like vetiver, which smell close but never quite nail the real thing. So if you've ever bought a candle labeled rain or petrichor and thought, close but not quite it, That's not your nose being picky. That's you correctly detecting a chemistry problem nobody has fully solved yet. Let's also correct one more thing people quietly assume. That petrichor smells the same everywhere, like it's one universal, standardized rain smell the whole planet shares. It doesn't, and that's not random. The exact blend depends entirely on the local mix of soil, bacteria, plant life, and even how dry the ground was beforehand. Rain hitting dry forest soil after a genuine drought produces a much stronger geosmin hit than rain falling on already damp pavement in a city that got a light shower 2 days ago, which is why petrichor smells noticeably richer and earthier out in the woods than it does on a rainy city sidewalk, where you're mostly getting diluted street runoff and whatever chemistry is hiding in urban soil and storm. Drain someone who grew up smelling rain hit rural farmland and someone who grew up smelling rain hit a downtown parking lot are, chemically, experiencing two different smells that both happen to share the same name. Same molecule doing the heavy lifting in both cases. Wildly different regional flavor profile layered on top, like a chemical signature unique to wherever you happen to be standing when the sky opens up. So next time a storm rolls through and that unmistakable smell hits you, you now know you're not smelling water. You're smelling a plant's interrupted survival strategy, a colony of bacteria's chemical afterlife, a burst of atmospheric ozone that arrived early just to give you a heads up, and thousands of microscopic champagne-style bubbles popping in perfectly synchronized timing across every square inch of ground around you. All of it happening in the same 3 seconds, completely for free, right in your driveway, while you stand there in socks you probably shouldn't have worn outside. Sharks would absolutely be jealous of that nose you're using right now, if sharks could smell it, which, notably, they cannot. Because none of this happens underwater, and also because sharks have never once in their existence had to worry about finding a good, damp patch of soil to grow crops in. Rain doesn't have a smell, water never did, and it never will. What you're actually smelling is everything the dry world was quietly holding on to, all at once, the second it finally gets permission to let go. So, where you're watching this from, what does your rain smell like? Forest floor rich? City sidewalk sharp? Or somewhere in between? You now have the actual chemistry to explain it either way.